This week's Four Questions Journalist Spotlight is brought to you by Leff's Atlanta Media, Atlanta's best journalist database. Subscribe at leffsatlantamedia.com.
Welcome to another edition of our Four Questions Journalist Spotlight. We've got a double header today. We've got the team from Appen Media. We've got Carl Appen, who is the Director of Content and Development, and Sydney Dangemond. Did I say that right, Sydney? Close enough. Close enough? All right,
yeah, I did.
All right, cool. Who is the new digital editor? Is that your correct title? Digital editor? All right, cool. So what I want to do first, and I've worked with the Appen folks for years and years, and it's one of the stronger media companies around town. So Carl, tell me a little bit first about Appen Media. How long you guys been around, and what are the products and media services that you guys are offering right now?
For sure. So bread and butter and kind of like the start of Appen Media was, weekly newspapers in North Metro Atlanta. Started with the Alfred Roswell Herald, which my parents started operating in '89. And then they've kind of, have expanded in years since Milton Herald, Johns Creek Herald, Forsyth Herald, all the way up in Cumming. And then my brother Hans is the publisher, and he started, really kind of taking the wheel around 2010, 2011. The reason I say that is because his addition to the weekly papers was we purchased the Dunwoody Crier in a mid 2019 from the famous Dick Williams. And then Hans also started the podcast network in 2018. Which has changed a lot since then, but is still operating on some different but full cylinders. And then I kind of came on board early 2019 full time to launch a little bit more of kind of like the digital initiatives. I'm a newsletter nut. I'm a big web news site nut. But of course, kind of at the end of the day, the bread and butter is the papers that are going out.
Okay, well that's an excellent kind of overview. So, Sydney, tell me a little bit about you and what your role is at the paper, and you've been there how long now?
Well, I was brought on as a freelancer when I was finishing up my degree at UGA in March or beginning of April, and then Carl asked me to come on as digital editor in May. And so I've just been getting my feet wet. I started full time back at the beginning of June. So mostly I've been doing reporting on the various areas, trying to get my feet wet in local government and kind of understand what's going on. And very soon I'm going to be dipping my toes in the water of the digital side of Appen and uploading stories to the site and working with Carl to launch these newsletters that we're excited about. And anything else that he points me in the direction of.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, local journalism is so important, and the ability that you guys offer to be able to cover local government, I think, is a key thing to keeping everybody honest and making sure that our city functions well, right?
Absolutely.
So, what would you say? And Carl, you jump in here too if you want. What differentiates Appen from not necessarily competitors, but other media companies in the market?
Carl?
Yeah, that's tough. I'm trying.
Well, let me ask you this way: what do you guys look at as when you say here's what we want to do? Here's what Appen wants to do in our community. What do you talk about around the newsroom table and say, here's the kind of story that we want to get to?
So I think a big thing, and Sydney might be a little bit tired of me talking about it, but my catchphrase these past couple months has been kind of being in the room. And I think that there's a lot that, when in kind of like the era of these chain newspapers, a lot of those chain newspapers are not in the room. And I think that there are lots of shiny, flashy things that local news can be trying to do. But at the end of the day, if you're not in the room, whatever the product is that you're coming out is already kind of handicapped. And I think that's our big focus, and what kind of makes us stand out around here is that we try to be in the room as much as possible.
So and that's a great point. The being in the room has gotten a little more challenging the last year or so, right? So how have you guys adapted, and how has that inability to be in the room all the time affected how you're able to deliver your products?
I will say, and this is Sydney's story, so she might have something more on it, but I thought it was a really good portrait of it. Obviously, covering city meetings that, for the most part have been going virtual, has been a blessing, just because I think that we can be in more places at once. But just to kind of show the value, recently there was Sydney is currently working on a story that I don't think would have had if she was not in the room. Actually, at least 2 in the past 2 weeks. But in trying to, it is very easy for city officials and other officials in our area to, you kind of make the handoff to the communications director, and you kind of have these emailed statements that can be useful for them, but a lot of times it takes being in the room and saying, I have been trying to get in touch with you and ask you this question. And I think Sydney's 2 stories in the past couple of days have been a good image of that.
Sydney, you want to elaborate on that at all?
Yeah, it's just sometimes it's hard to get in touch with people. Everyone knows this, and it's easier to hide behind your computer screen and not answer your phone. But if I show up at a city council work session and I look at you face to face and say, hey, let's set up a conversation, it's a little bit harder to live in polite society and say no to that. But it's also good, Carl's talking about being in the room, letting them know that there's someone that's watching, paying attention. There was a city council meeting I went to a couple weeks ago where the big item was stormwater, and dozens of community members came to and so after that item was over, everyone left. And so it was the city council, like the city officials, like the city manager, and me, the only person left in the room. And so they ended up talking about some important things that residents needed to know about. So I'm glad that we were there.
Are there particular stories that you want to cover for your geographic area of town that you think are kind of the big issues coming up?
Well, right now, really today, I'm working on a story about Johns Creek's new police chief. And that has been a big issue for the city. There was some controversy over the last chief, and all of that happened amid the pandemic and the systemic issues in policing that were brought to light last summer. And so this is it's a big deal for the local community. I'm also working on a story about a local cemetery that's been getting vandalized, that has, some of the remains that are former slaves. And so that's it's important to the community, and kind of any stories that have been not getting covered.
Right. So let's talk kind of from a digital versus print perspective. Are there things that you guys are working on that you're going to add or change about the product? I was looking at the website this morning, and there's something subtly different about it, but I can't quite tell what's different about it this morning. I don't know if you guys have made a little change in the format or not, but it looks very clean today.
Yes. So I kind of launched. So it corresponded with when we bought the Dunwoody Crier. So historically, the Herald, all of the news from the Herald newspapers had always been on one site, northbolton.com. And then when we bought the Dunwoody Crier, we kind of had a few months of this weird time when we had to file stories to both sites, and you weren't sure where to kind of spend the most time. So my project, and basically during 2020, was sort of creating a central hub for all 5 papers and the news, and a little bit outside of those regions, plus bringing in kind of the podcast, aspect to it. I'm not sure how far in depth you want to go in terms of digital initiatives. I think that a big part of the website, so there was a lot of kind of refinement, but a big part of me is it was this, kind of ancient site. And in order to roll new things out, it would have taken a lot of just development to kind of build on top. And so I kind of took the approach of get everything back to just sort of the really strong structure that kind of has these sockets where you can, put these new little tools in there.
Right. So in terms of kind of how the flow is working now, is there, say if I had a story for the Johns Creek Herald versus the Milton Herald, are there different editors for each one, or does that kind of off?
So I think maybe an important distinction, I kind of view them a little bit differently. The news is one product. And I think I sort of correlate the Johns Creek Herald with the print weekly paper that shows up at the driveway, at every week. The idea with the site and sort of the newsletters and some, local news podcasts, the idea with the site is that it's more, it's an Appen Media story and it's an Appen News story. So the answer is no, it would not be for each individual paper. Obviously, the same way that kind of Patchworks or other, that cover just a whole bunch of areas, you can filter it down so you can go and see all of the Johns Creek news. But the idea is, if we had a story about, what Alfredo was working on for T-Splost, coming up in November, that affects Johns Creek. And so the idea is you wouldn't want to limit it to, if you're in Johns Creek, you're only reading stories, about the city of Johns Creek, because we cover more stories as a news organization than is just in the Johns Creek Herald. It would be applicable to Johns Creek residents.
Okay. So it kind of as a functional question, if someone has story ideas for one paper or another, does that all filter through you or Sydney or either? How would that work?
It's a good question. I think if it was, so for right now, if it was, a Johns Creek story, Sydney's been primarily covering Johns Creek. If you had an Alpharetta story, I would imagine that most people would probably send it to Pat Fox, just because they know him and they know his byline for so long.
Right.
So the idea is that you would send it to the Appen Media newsroom. But that said, because so much of the reach is through these individual papers, there's still going to be a lot of people that would call Pat for an Alfreda story, as they should.
And so if I've got a Dunwoody story, for example, where would that go? So
you would call Kathy Cobbs, who is this is one of my favorite things. This is a New Year's article from the Dunwoody Crier from 1999, and it has a Kathy Cobb's byline right on the front cover. So she has been covering Dunwoody for the Crier for an appropriately long amount of time. So I like that story just because whenever I'm making decisions, I always kind of like have this upper left corner and say, okay, Kathy, Kathy's saying, you better not, kind of mess this up for the Crier.
Okay. All right. So Kathy for Dunwoody, Patrick for Alfreda Roswell, Forsyth Herald.
Forsyth would be, that's one kind of hole that we have. Joe Parker is the editor and name of the Forsyth Herald, but Joe Parker is really the editor of the Milton Herald. Right now, he covers in name Forsyth Herald.
Okay, and Johns Creek.
Johns Creek would, mostly be Sydney.
Okay, and then Milton.
Milton would be Joe Parker.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just want to make sure I've got, and that's because that's good information for people who are watching this, so they know, okay, who do I go to? That way, they're not going to the. It kind of saves you guys time. They're not going to the wrong person and
for sure
wasting time. I mean, I'm sure you guys don't have a 600-person newsroom, so I'm sure it's easy to It's easy to share, but however we can make it easier, the better, right?
For sure.
Yeah. All right. So Sydney, anything else on kind of that perspective, on the digital perspective that we should talk about?
Nothing for me yet.
All right.
If you call me back in a couple of months, I'm sure I'll have.
Yeah. No. Well, it's funny because sometimes folks will say, "Well, I just started. Give me a couple of months, and then we'll do this interview." But this, I felt like I had to talk to you guys in a while, so I really wanted to have this conversation. So let's talk about podcasts, because I know you guys, Carl, you had mentioned that you guys had kind of made some tweaks in the podcast schedule, and we were talking off camera earlier about one or two of the podcasts. So run me through the lineup, and we don't necessarily have to get into detail on each one, but let's because you guys have a pretty deep podcast schedule here.
For sure. So I think historically, when Hans kind of started the podcast network, his idea was almost very similar to a music label, with the idea of people could come when they had show ideas, and we could help them produce it and kind of come up with some relationship. I think that changed big time in early 2019 with the idea of, I took more of the less Universal Records, more HBO, with the idea of, I really like kind of going out and finding like a specific story or a specific show or a specific theme that we want to produce and kind of put on, which kind of all came to head with Cadillac Jack, longtime host of Kicks for 25 years in Atlanta, launched Cadillac Jack, My Second Act podcast, which is bi-weekly show with he and his wife Donna come into the studio. This morning, Ben Burnett was in the show for it was in the studio for the Ben Burnett podcast. Cadillac Jack has sort of a little bit of an umbrella brand where there's Cadillac Jack, My Second Act. There's also a show called Caddy Wagon, and it's sort of like a more family-oriented podcast version of Cops, to where he goes on the road with an Alpharetta police officer and their canine sidekick, and so you get some audio from the police car, and you'll hear stops, and then you come back into the car, and Caddy and the officer will kind of walk you through what just happened on the stop, and why it's important to do or not do certain things in certain areas. And then also there's Hustle, which is a little bit of kind of like a business-oriented podcast, again under kind of the Cadillac Jack label within the podcast network, which is pretty standard, like boutique interviews with local executives.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the pages we're talking. So yeah, I was so focused. I'll drop in some text here too at the bottom, but
for sure,
appenmedia.com/podcasts is a way to go to see that, and of course appenmedia.com for the papers, all the papers and whatnot in general, and we'll mention that a couple of times here. So if folks look at this and say, hey, I may have a guest or news or something interesting from one of those podcasts, should they go through one of you or go through?
So I can just kind of rattle off anything that would be, morning show, music industry, could go to, Cadillac Jack, which is Cadillac@AppleMedia.com. Preston is the host of the Georgia Politics podcast. So any sort of state level, anything from, the Capitol could go to Preston Thompson, who's the host of Georgia Politics podcast. Trying to think, people probably wouldn't pitch things for Drafted. Ben Burnett, is obviously either Ben Burnett show at AppleMedia.com or Ben at AppleMedia.com. And then kind of anything network level would still go to Hans, which is Hans at AppleMedia.com.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Cause I'm looking at, like for example, and some of these shows sometimes are not necessarily guest appropriate, but somebody like the lunch break, the one about food, that might be right. If someone's got a restaurant or an event, if it's food related, that might be interesting for them. And raising mommy, obviously, if someone's got mom related kinds of things, and then North Fulton Serves looks like a good one for nonprofits in that area too. Yeah.
Kimberly at AppleMedia.com and Jason at AppleMedia.com respectively.
for the okay, wait.
Raising Mommy and North Fulton Serves.
Okay, cool. All right, I'll figure it out. I'll note that. Okay.
Okay.
You guys got lots of stuff, and I was excited a couple of years ago when I saw you were doing more of the podcasting, because I think that's a growing segment, and I think it's really interesting.
I could talk a lot about it, and same with newsletters. I'm a little bit of a podcast nut. I will say, think content writing or kind of like SEO focused blogging in like 1995, to where it's sort of like, I think audio wise, it's a little bit of I call it like the wild, wild west. Because historically people have sort of, written blog style online content for so long, trying to get, in favor of capital B, capital S, big search. Audio is the same kind of thing. So if I Google on my computer, what's the weather like in Alpharetta, or what happened, what's going on in Alpharetta this weekend, you're going to see 100,000 websites that are kind of trying to like focus in on the people who are physically typing that. But as more voice friendly things kind of come into our houses, come into our cars with Sonos and Chevy and that kind of thing, if you said, hey Siri or hey Alexa, what's happening in Alpharetta this weekend, there are not 100,000 blog sites that are kind of trying to focus in on that thing. So I think, like I said, that's my audio elevator pitch. I think that it's a little bit of the wild, wild west.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so now we'll get to the lightning round a little bit. This is sometimes the more challenging part of these interviews. Is I'm going to start with Carl, since I've got you, and then we'll go back to Sydney. So Carl, what is something cool or fun about you that folks might not know about, and could be anything, kind of fun and interesting that people are like, wow, I didn't know you did that.
It's definitely a go-to. I worked as a line cook through college. It basically a dive bar in the wee hours of a dive bar in a college town. So that's my quirky background.
All right. Last book read.
Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil.
All right. Favorite local restaurant.
That one's easy. I love From the Earth in Roswell.
From the Earth. Okay. See, I get good places to go eat when I do these too. All right.
Yeah,
favorite
east from 400.
Favorite guilty pleasure.
Absolutely. Microwave nachos.
Microwave nachos. Okay. All right.
Yep.
Local getaway. I know there's so many. Got to pick one. All right, we'll come back to that.
Okay.
All right, favorite non-work hobby.
Making music, whether it's again kind of digital or analog with guitar and strings, or keeping it online with a little bit of GarageBand.
All right, cool. All right, so I'm going to jump to City now, and if you come back to the local getaway, we'll come back to that at the end. Okay. You can tell me what the local getaway is. All right, Sydney. So now you get the challenging questions here. So something cool, fun, and different about Sydney that people might not know.
I was actually just talking to Carl about this the other day. I have been a member of the Save the Manatee Club since 2006. It's super weird, but I love the manatee. I have my coffee in my I Love Manatees mug today. And yeah, it was just like a school project in elementary school, and I adopted a manatee, and it's the best thing ever. Freshman year of college, I took a trip and I went snorkeling with the manatees, and that was an incredible experience.
So Crystal Springs down in Florida?
Yeah, Homosassa Springs.
Homosassa, yep. We were down there last fall. Fun place.
Oh,
okay.
Great.
All right. Last book read.
The Hobbit. I just finished it.
First time?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Time to watch the movies now and ruin it.
Yeah, it's a great book. The movie, yeah, it's like there's a page in the book where it says, "And there was a battle," and Jackson, they made like 6 hours of movies based on, hey, there was a battle.
That's what I heard.
Yeah. All right. Favorite local restaurant.
I have one for Atlanta. It's called El Tesoro, and it's a Mexican restaurant. And I have dreams about the burrito I had there. So.
Ooh, okay. Let's give credit. Where is that? Where is that located?
Let me see. It's in Atlanta. It's off of Arkwright Place.
Okay. All right. People can find that. All right.
Yeah.
Favorite guilty pleasure.
That's a hard one. I try not to feel guilty about
All right. All right. Well, then I'll jump to favorite non-work hobby. Maybe that's a guilty pleasure.
Something I don't do as often as I would like, but I love to snorkel. So much fun snorkeling with manatees, without manatees.
No, that's cool. And kind of, you have a favorite local getaway?
I just took a great trip to Tybee Island and Savannah, and it was incredible.
Coastal Isles are awesome. All right, Carl, I think I've given you some time to think of your favorite local getaway. Have we come to a decision?
Yeah, I would say either previously named Locos in Alpharetta would be my local getaway.
Okay, very good. All right, so we've kind of hit a lot here. Is there anything in particular that we haven't talked about that you guys want to mention, either about the papers, about who covers what, about the podcast, or in general about Appen that folks might be interested in?
The only thing I can think of recently is that we're part of the 2021 cohort for the Texas Tribune's Revenue Lab. So we're specifically talking about news events and trying to create news events and editorial events as a product, which is, we've had events before, but they've always been very sales related. And I think it's just another way to kind of get the news that we're producing out into the community and engage with people. So that is what I'm excited for 2021.
Excellent. Sydney, any final words?
I'm really excited to have joined the Appen Media team and to be working to give quality, ethical, fact-check local journalism to the community that I grew up in. Super important, and I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. And if there were not finer words to leave on, I'll leave it at that. That's great. That's great. We've been talking with Sydney and Carl with the Appen Media Group. Thank you both for taking some time today. We really appreciate it. And everyone else, join us next week, hopefully, maybe the week after, maybe next week, for another edition of our 4 Questions Journalist Spotlight.